This week on the show, TikTok, good quality speakers, and smart lighting in your home. In tech news this week, how would you like to have your very own private jet? I think most of us would appreciate the ability to fly anywhere on the planet that we wanted to go in the comfort of our own jet. Well, the Qatari government is not just getting rid or selling one of their private jets, they're selling the ultimate private jet. This is the Qatari 747-8i jumbo jet, and it has been kitted out with the most opulent, luxurious fit out you can imagine. They've only actually done just over 1,000 hours flying time in this thing from the moment the jet rolled off the production line to today, and they've decided, even though it's kitted out, full custom build, they're not going to keep this one. They've had a number of these jets. This thing is even bigger than Air Force One. It's a longer jet because it's based off the 8 Series 747, which is just a longer fuselage than the larger of the 747s that are in commercial operation, but they don't need it. So you'll be able to, if you've got the cash, have your own flying palace. Be able to fly anywhere in the world. Just need to have the cash. Doesn't say on the website how much they're asking for, but I would imagine more than any of us could afford. Also in tech news, Samsung has released the announcement of their wireless charger with built-in UV sterilizer. Come on, do we need to actually have a UV sterilizer for our smartphone these days? Maybe we do with COVID-19 and that dreaded virus attaching itself to all sorts of different services. A UV sterilizer could be the solution. We know that ultraviolet light does kill the COVID bug or virus. In this instance, charge your phone, kill the COVID-19 virus, and keep yourself healthy and charged at the same time. I don't know, not for me, but maybe for everyone on the planet. Could be the 2020 killer app or non-killer app of the tech world. We'll see whether this one does well when it's released later this year. A few days ago, we caught up with Andy Kerr from Bowers Wilkins, makers of high-end quality speakers. Their new speakers have just been released in the 7,000 range. And we spoke to Andy about making speakers. What's the hardest part of actually making a high-end speaker?
I think the hardest thing to get right in lots of ways is the cabinet itself. It's probably the bit that you might not expect. You might not think you might first off think of the drive units, which are the bits that move, obviously, that move the air. But actually, it's the cabinet. I think the best analogy I can give you of this is a guitar or another musical instrument. The construction of that guitar really helps the sound. It's a bit like when I'm speaking right now or when you're speaking, if you put your hand on your chest and you can feel that kind of vibration moving through the top of your chest, the sounds that you make are a combination of sound coming from here and also sound from the structure around you. And a guitar is a perfect example. You can think of loads of others, I'm sure. In a loudspeaker, we just don't want that at all. In a loudspeaker, we want, in fact, the complete reverse. The only sound we want you to hear is the sound that comes from the cones that move, and we don't want the construction that they live in to make any contribution whatsoever. And essentially, that's quite hard to do, because if you can imagine those cones moving forwards and backwards, they're making a lot of energy, and that energy or vibration has to go somewhere. And typically what it does is it goes into the box, and then the box is making sounds, and what happens is your brain detects that and goes, I'm listening to a loudspeaker. So the challenge for everybody in our world is to try and make that more believable sound, as you just described earlier on, by essentially making that loudspeaker disappear as best as we possibly can. And that's where more exotic materials, more exotic processes, heavy metals, whatever you want to talk about, come into the play to try and make that loudspeaker go completely quiet. And as a result, make it sound more like you're listening to the real performance.
Well, big talking point in tech at the moment is TikTok. The Australian government came out with a position recently saying that they were going to look at the TikTok service as part of a Senate inquiry into social media and the data that's being harvested by these services. This is a fairly big rabbit hole to go down, the TikTok service, social media services. I think TikTok's getting a lot of attention, especially because it's so popular with the younger members of the community. To have a chat about the app, the data that's generated, the service in general, I thought we'd talk with app expert and friend of the show, Mike Boyd. Mike, TikTok, the app, this service, you know a lot about these guys.
Look, it's a really interesting platform, Charlie, and it's come a long way since it merged with what was formerly Musical.ly a couple of years ago.
And let's look at the service to begin with. How big is it? How popular is it? Give me some information around that.
All right, so look, recent statistics have TikTok's monthly active users, which is the big benchmark that all apps use, at about 800 million a month. Wow. And the app itself was downloaded 700 million times in 2019. Here in Australia, slightly smaller numbers, of course, but it's anywhere between 1.6 to 1.7 million users in Australia at the moment, which is not insignificant. And I think the frequency of its usage is probably the thing that raises most eyebrows.
This is a social media platform. Instagram is a social media platform. Facebook is a platform. What's the reason that TikTok is getting so much attention versus the other ones that are out there? Aren't they much the same?
Look, they're all much the same. You're right. I mean, they're all about trying to get your attention and get your attention in such a way that you're going back to these apps to look at the content, and then the content, and the more content you consume, the more content you look at, then the more data and information that they build up about you. And then from that point of view, which, like all of these platforms, it's all about the advertising dollar that then can flow back through those platforms based on the fact that I know that, this user might be a 30-year-old male who's into, he's a tradie, therefore he's into clothing, or he might be into utes, versus a 15-year-old girl who might be into dancing or into rowing or whatever it might be. So they're all very unique in that, very similar in that regard. But what's interesting is when you look at the way that people use them, particularly teenage kids, the distinction between what they use TikTok for, what they use Instagram for, and what they're using Snapchat for is really interesting.
Is it the fact that, let's be realistic, TikTok is being used by a large number and an ever-growing number of kids who are under the approved age of 13 to actually use the service? It seems to be that is the age group that's really pulled towards using TikTok.
Yeah, and like all good app developers, ByteDance, which is the company that creates TikTok, and a bunch of other apps, they are extremely good at building a very, very easy to use, intuitive interface. So you can just load up TikTok. You watch one video, you swipe up to the next one, you swipe up to the next one. It's very, very simple. As opposed to a platform like Snapchat, which has got all sorts of inherent quirks in it that you understand the more you use it. So the simplicity of its use means that it's very attractive to kids of all ages, and I agree that really is where the area of concern is for the government.
When I look at the privacy requests that is being made on the TikTok app when you're installing it, it seems to be to me that there's a lot more information that the app is requesting than other social media platforms that are being installed onto your device too. Is that correct?
Look, yes. TikTok probably is at the really outer end of the envelope, so to speak, of what it actually requests. Of course, you have most apps like a Facebook or an Instagram and so forth. They want access to your gallery, so you can upload photos and videos. They want access to your camera. They might want access to your location because they want to serve up content and or advertising relative to where you are. But it's where you then get into the other, not necessarily privacy aspects, but the way that the apps then can control what your device is doing. So, for instance, when you install TikTok on your device, it can prevent the phone from sleeping. It can also, on an Android device, it has full read-write access if you have an SD card inserted into your Android device. It can read the home screen settings. So there's lots of things that it learns about you and your device, which I think is certainly the situation that it's got itself into, and getting it being looked at very closely by regulators.
But why does it need all that? I mean, if Facebook doesn't need that level of access, then why is TikTok needing that? And is that sort of the bit that's getting their hand caught in the mousetrap, so to speak? The fact that they've actually requested these access points or these authorizations. The things are being loaded onto handsets of kids, yet the kids don't understand the privacy implications of all of this. The parents who are obviously authorizing this don't seem to understand it or care about it. Yet in their hand, there's a device that can read and write to the SD card or understand so much more about what the handset is doing than just the operation of the app itself.
That's right, and I think it is. It's that there's two sides to this in terms of it's the privacy aspects directly related to the user, and then it's the control over the device as we talked about. And then I think that really where it gets very serious is then that take all of that information, and then the question mark around where is that data going? Is that data being stored? In mainland China? Is it accessible by the Chinese government? Now, TikTok have come out and said that their data is stored in servers in the US and in Singapore, and that the Chinese government has no access to it. Now, that's a really interesting sort of response and not unexpected, until you then look at the fact that the Indian government and India, in TikTok's world, India is a third of their user base. The Indian government last week banned TikTok and a bunch of other apps as well because of serious concerns over privacy issues to citizens.
Can you ban an app though? I mean, what does that mean? You can't use an app. Okay, well, so what? I mean, if the federal government in Australia came out and said, you can't use this app, what are they going to do? Block the access to it at the hub point into Australia of the internet? Well, how do you do that?
Yeah, well, look. Essentially, they'll block it. They'll either make it illegal for it. So first things first, they'll ban its download on the app stores, and that's pretty easy to do. And most of these apps now, instead of asking you to sign up and put in your first name and surname and date of birth and email address and whatever else, they usually start off by simply getting your phone number. So essentially what they would do is they would not allow any, and this is obviously more geared towards new users, they wouldn't allow a phone number that starts with +61, which is the Australian country code, to be put into the app. So we've removed it from the app stores. We don't allow Australian phone numbers. And then what they would do is then they would block the IP addresses for the servers that actually provide all the content into the app itself. So they essentially cut off the supply lines of data to the apps.
And then I guess it's up to the 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds to go and find a way around it if they can. The final question I wanted to ask you about this is, if TikTok is so bad, why is it being used so much by young kids, Mike? Do you think that the parents don't know, don't care, or just give in to the lobbying for them and their kids as to why they should be able to access the service?
Look, Charlie, I think it's a lot of those things. I mean, I've got a 17-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter, and my wife and I have gone through all of this over the last few years. There is a lot of peer pressure. I remember, our son, I think it was, when he turned sort of 13, so look, I want to get Instagram, and it was almost that sort of modern day rite of passage, right? I've turned 13 now, I can actually have Instagram now. So I think there's a lot of peer pressure. I think also there is a lot of complacency with parents. I think there's probably a lot of parents out there that just don't know what they don't know. And I know that's sort of a harsh way to look at it, but there really does need to be a lot more education, I believe, coming through schools, but also coming through other channels for parents to say, look, this is what you really need to know. You don't need to know the ins and outs of how it works, but you really do need to know what the risks are here of for your child and what they might be exposed to on these platforms and what those issues could lead to. And I also think that to a certain degree, there's also the app manufacturers themselves, the app builders and designers themselves, that there needs to be a bit more transparency around what they're doing with content and what they're doing with this data, and being held to account to say our data is stored in these either virtual locations or physical locations. So there is a high degree of confidence for governments and for parents to understand exactly what the challenges and risks might be.
Yeah, well, it looks like they've got a lot of work to do around confidence, especially with authorities, yes. No doubt with parents. But looks like the 12-year-olds of the community are totally fine with it, though. TikTok, we'll talk again about it. Mike Boyd, thank you for your time today. Great to have a good chat to you about this one. I hope we've answered everybody's questions and filled in a lot of the gaps about this service and what some of the nastiness of it could potentially be. We'll chat to you again soon. Appreciate your time.
Excellent, Charlie. Have a good day.
Continuing our chat with Andy Kerr from Bowers Wilkins, we asked about the formats of music. What is the best format? And is it essential to use only the highest quality audio format when listening to music?
Okay, so we work obviously with uncompressed stuff, but lossless streaming is also available. It depends on markets, of course, but the likes of Cobars and Tidal, if they are available in your part of the world, offer very good quality services. There are others as well. I think essentially the more you put into them, for sure, the more you get out of them. What I don't ever want to get us involved in is saying, oh, you shouldn't listen to Spotify. I think a good system should be able to reward even, relatively speaking, lower quality sources of content, because ultimately the reason you buy a pair of loudspeakers is not to listen to digital file types or to think about streaming qualities. The reason you buy a pair of loudspeakers is to listen to music. That's really the point. And they won't necessarily be at their absolute best if what you want to do is throw in a low quality MP3 file. That's just the truth, because there's certainly more headroom in them. But on the other hand, if that's what you want to do and it means you're listening to music and you're enjoying it, well, who am I to say that's wrong? That's probably what a lot of people do on a daily basis. Myself, and I think a lot of the guys that I work with, we have, again, that kind of mixed model of listening. So I use Spotify to help me find new music. I use a very nice high-end record player at the other end of the scale when I want to have that me time. And then I have streaming services from other providers, and I also have ripped CDs. So as I say, I think the main point here is just enjoy yourself. Don't stress about the technical aspects of it. Just enjoy the experience of listening to an album and enjoying what that can do for you in a kind of an emotional, uplifting, whatever you want to call it, kind of state.
All right, with part of the country under lockdown again, which is very, very sad to hear. We're thinking of everyone who's tuning in, who lives in Melbourne, who cannot go out and do what we've all been enjoying for the last few weeks. Well, one of the things that you might be wanting to do with your home, regardless of lockdown or not, is smart lights. The smart light is cheaper than ever, smarter than ever. And I thought today with our chat with Geoff Quattromani, tech expert, we'd have a chat about what the latest in smart lights is. Welcome to the show, Geoff Quattromani.
G'day, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
Now, good to have a chat. The pricing of smart lights has come down a lot. Where are we at the moment in terms of what you'd be prepared or expected to pay?
Look, this is one of the greatest things. I think initially when smart lights became available, it was more of a gimmick because the actual cost of putting a smart light in was far greater than the cost of a non-smart light. And when it comes down to whether I flick that switch on the wall or whether I talk to a smart speaker to turn it on, the actual cost gap was too big. What we're now seeing, though, from a number of brands, including the bigger brands like Philips Hue, are really reducing in price. But new brands have come onto the market like Connect Smart Home, and we're seeing where you can get a LED globe that would fit into a light, into a lamp, or even into the ceiling for $10. And when you start to consider that once a light dies in the house, or if you just want to do something for fun and replace the lamp globe, $10, it's a pretty amazing way to get into smart lighting without, forking out too much money.
Once upon a time, you chose a standard looking smart light bulb, and you really chose between bayonet or the what's the other one, the twist
Screw in.
Screw in of the bracket. Now you've got all these different features, strips and inbuilt into the ceiling, and all these different options of regular light as well, allowing a much wider range of designs that you can include in your home, right?
And this is one of the greatest things about LED lighting, is that it allows you to start to think differently about where you place lights and also how you interact with them as well. Because, to your point, strip lighting is something that I use in the home, and I love it for just illuminating areas of the kitchen or even just underneath lounges. You can really bring light into areas where you probably never thought about doing it before. It doesn't always have to come from the ceiling. And then the other factor, now that everything is smart, is how you can enable lighting in the home. And for me, that comes down to, I'm on my way home from work and I want to actually come home to the lights on, so I can be talking in my car and turn on the bedside lampshade, turn on the kitchen lights. And that just means that when I do arrive home, it's not a dark house anymore. So you start to think about how you use lighting, especially when it comes to colors. There's so many different things you can be doing when it comes to smart lights now.
You and your wife have had your first child. He's a very young little chap. I would imagine that there's occasions where you'd be walking through that front door with him asleep. Have you tried you maybe even using the voice instruction to bring the lights on, but only at 30-40%, not to wake the little guy up?
That's exactly what does happen. And it could be even just walking into the house with your hands full of shopping bags or something like that. Walking into the home and being able to just call out to Google or Alexa to control your lights, huge benefit. And again, to your point around having it dimmed, a lot of people don't know that we're not just talking about turning your lights on and off here. This is actually controlling brightness or even the color that you're having the lights display too. So you can walk into the home, talk about just displaying at 10% brightness. So you still get a bit of lights for you to be able to see, but not bright enough that your kids are about to wake up, especially if they're sleeping in your arms, as you said. So huge benefits. The other thing I'll actually mention too around being able to control those lights like that is when you're on holidays. We used to set timers up. You used to have these little boxes you put into the wall where your lamps would actually activate on a timer. You do that with smart lights now just straight through the app. So if you're going away for the weekend, your lights can come on, off, change colors, do whatever you'd like while you're away. So it actually looks like the house is still being lived in. And all you've done is press some buttons on the app.
We spoke to the creator of Lifx, one of the founders, and he was talking about how the biggest challenge they had was making the chip that connected to the Wi-Fi being able to operate at 120 degrees. Because, when would a chip ever be designed, by any of the chip makers to actually operate under those conditions? That was the biggest thing, right? But now, today, obviously they've sorted that out. The bit I want to know about is, if I've got a smart light system, do I have to have all the same brand? Can I have a bit of Philips Hue and a bit of Lifx, a bit of Smart Connect? Do they all get friendly with each other, or do they all have to live on their own in your home?
Look, it's a good question to ask. I have almost every brand under the sun at somewhere in this house. What I find is, if I'm using voice, then it doesn't really matter what brand I've got connected. If I want to turn on the bedside lamp, that's a command I'm doing through Google or Alexa to do that. When it comes to controlling on your phone, however, unless it supports Apple HomeKit, which they don't all do, then you are going into individual apps to control those lights. So that would only be okay if you've got particular brands dedicated to a room, where if I walk into the lounge room, I'm going into one app to control the lounge room lights. But when you are using voice, the best bit is they're all usually supportive of the Google Assistant or Alexa. And that means you can just use your voice to control, Philips Hue, Lifx, or Connect Smart Home without a problem. So for me, I don't notice the brands when I walk into, say, this room. I just use my command, and that little lamp behind me will turn on. Brilliant.
Smarter than ever, cheaper than ever, more convenient than ever as well. Have a look at them. Smart lights, a definite benefit for your home, and making your home more comfortable. Geoff Quattromani, thanks for your time once again. We'll chat to you again next week.
Thanks, Jay.
The last part of our chat with Andy Kerr from Bowers and Wilkins goes toward purchasing high-end speakers. Are these an investment for life?
Do you know what? I really think they are. I mean, one of the things we find is a lot of our speakers get used for a long period of time. They tend to last. They also tend to retain value, which is interesting as well. So, yeah, I mean, we find customers have had speakers for 20, 25 years, bringing them back to us, asking us to refurbish them and kind of get them back on the road again. So, yeah, I think if you buy something that really makes a difference to your day, you're probably going to use it more. You're probably going to value it more. You probably want to keep it more. I think we've kind of got used to a world where a lot of consumer goods, especially consumer electronics, become redundant really quite quickly. I mean, a perfect example would be phones, but there are lots of other examples. That HD TV that you bought, 8-9 years ago is, theoretically completely out of date in the modern world of 4K and coming 8K and all that kind of stuff. But speakers tend to last, and they don't radically change. I think, as I mentioned earlier on in the conversation, the way the speakers work now is broadly similar to the way they work for a period of time. So if they're done right, they should last you the rest of your life, no problem.
Thanks for tuning into the show. A long one today because we had some long interviews that we wanted to get through to make sure you got all the information. Questions, comments, please put them in the comments section. We'll be back next week with more Cyber Shack Live. See you then.